Alrighty. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of What Wednesdays. I'm your fellow traveler of the Whale Road, Fragath, and today we're going to be finishing up Beowulf, a new translation by Maria Dahvana Headley. I also would like to get to the author's introduction, which is going to double the running time. uh, because it is quite long. It is a 34 page introduction. And it kind of explains some of her background and rationale for why she made the decisions she did, um, which I think are reasonable. It makes for a different take on Beowulf, and I appreciate that. So previously on, Beowulf not only has dealt with Grendel. That reminds me, I need to get my handy-dandy pronunciation cheat sheet, because I realized last week that I'd been pronouncing Shopes wrong the entire time. It's spelled Scops. It is not pronounced this way. And for some reason, that one slipped through the cracks. There were a bunch that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to deal with that a bunch of times. I should probably remember this, and then proceeded not to, because I am a clever, clever narrator who totally pays attention. So not only did he deal with Grendel, that was haunting Heorot, he dealt with Grendel's mother, who is a rough, tough, murderous wife, who is rather upset that her son has been murdered, monstrous though he was, and proceeds to exact her own tally in blood. So he descends into the mere and kills her ultimately. Um, Hrothgar is very, very pleased by this, and is like, "You are an adopted son for life. We are now forever, forever allies. You ever need anything, give me a holler, and I hope to see you again. That would be nice." He then proceeds to go back to his father, um, who may or who may not actually be his biological dad. It's the way they traded people around the tribes back then, these groups, these clans, these families, does make that a little confusing. Um, yeah, Heolak. So, and then regales him with the tale of how that went down, and he's like, "Wow, that was pretty awesome. You are a real man now," and so on. So with that, I think I'll get cracking, because we have a fair amount of reading ahead of us. And now we have the Dragon's Horde incident. If a lot of the depictions in this seem familiar to you as a Tolkien reader, that's because Tolkien cribbed very liberally from this. This influenced him, as it does all great writers. Uh, or as it would all. Never mind. That came out wrong. What I meant to imply was something along the lines of great writers are influenced by things, as was Tolkien. So the whole imagery of smog on top of a giant mountain of gold is uh, part of that. It's you'll see. We'll get there. If you're unfamiliar with the tale, the poem, the adventures of one Beowulf. Alrighty. Let me get some water into me real quick and we'll get this moving along. Sorry about that. Later days were cloudier. A war began. Hygelac was dead by then, his shield yielding no safety for his Hun, Heardred, against the war-wired Scylfings, who patrolled, hunting for the young HWÆT king. I think that's Scylfings. Yes, it's Scylfings. Not to be confused with the Scefings, who are different. Let's take that from the top. I'm sorry. Later days were cloudier. A war began. Hygelac was dead by then, his shield yielding no safety for his son, Heardred, against the war-wired Scylfings, who patrolled, hunting for the young HWÆT king. They found him surrounded by his soldiers, slew them, and after that, boys, well, you know. The rings rolled down to Beowulf. He caught the kingdom he'd rejected, and held tight to it for 50 winters, before he, too, found himself an old man, the grey guardian of Geatland. Across a star-studded sky in deepest dark one night, a dragon ranged, unchecked. She was She was a scar-skinned warrior, long accustomed to shadow soaring by moonlight, defending her claim, hoarding her in her own high hall. No man knew the way the dragon's cliff-top cocoon. Oh my god, I'm skipping words everywhere today. I don't know what's going on. This is embarrassing. I'm going to take this stanza from the top. I am so sorry. Across a star-studded sky in deepest dark one night, a dragon ranged unchecked. She was a scar-skinned warrior, long accustomed to shadow soaring by moonlight, defending her claim, hoarding in her own high hall. No man knew the way into the dragon's cliff-top cocoon, but a thief stumbled through a split in the stone, and retrieved a gem-glistering goblet. He robbed her of nothing else, just the cup. But up she rose, raging, grieving, though to cry out was to confess that she'd been stripped while sleeping. This country, these creatures, would feel her fire. The instigator hadn't intended to ignite Armageddon. He'd merely slunk into a cave and found a crypt. This slave, seeking safety from a miserly master, became the spark that smoked a primeval monarch out. He spelunked into yawning dark and gripped a wall. Instead of clammy stone, he felt a kiln. Instead of granite, gold. Whose forbidden hold was this? What had he provoked? He wrapped trembling fingers around the first small, shining thing he found, and fled. For the vault was more than a treasury. Piles of preciouses nested beneath the coils of a snoring serpent. It was a bed. Bro, no one living knows the name of the lost soul who'd interred those spoils long ago, burying the grave goods of a wealthy race. Death had snatched them all into a sack and lifted them out of existence, leaving only one, this ghost custodian, mourning over friends, family, foes alike. He had no future for himself in mind, nothing but a dead end. Left with only this haul of tomb treasure, nothing to spend it on, no joys left to consume, he attempted to wring pleasure from his stint as the richest man alive. There was a barrow already built, high on a headland above the sand, secured by waves against trespass. The last man climbed the slope, carrying his collection, all the things worth saving, all the wonders he could find. He organized the bounty, performing final rites. Hold these, Mother Earth! Men have lost their grip. We mined this metal from you, forged it for fighting, ruined ourselves, warring against one another. Man by man we gave our souls over to spite, lives flashing before our eyes, farewells to all our hopes. I'm alone here now, no sword-bearer, no cup-keeper, no hall-sweeper. My flock's flown south without me. This hard helmet will lose its filigree. There's no polisher waiting to keep our battle masks gleaming. Everyone once waking now dreams. This breastplate endured many battles, bruised by blades, smashed by shields. Now it'll be red dust along with its owner. Metal shells rest here without their warriors. Now there are no heroes, no soothing music, no harp, no hawk soaring through hall, no swift horses trampling green grass. We existed. Now we're extinct. And so the last survivor mourned, making his way from emptiness to emptiness, listing his sins one by one, wandering the world woefully, until death came welling in to wash him from the rocks. Afterward, an ancient collector soaring through the starry hours happened past, and saw a golden glyph from above. A flame-tongued one who sought out strongholds as she scourged, a slip-skinned dragon, tagging the sky with flaming sigils. Farmers kept vigil, dreading her smoky signs. She was hungry for hordes, tempted by temples, and every burial site was known by her to hold heathen hopes, howling for a new owner. There she dwelt, this nameless fear, for 300 years, padlocking her hall with all her limbs until the infiltrator infuriated her. That slave skittered to the owner's home with the stolen goblet, and gifted it to get mercy. Thus the hold of the old gold get was known, her vault catalogued, her ring hoard rung. For the master clocked what he was looking at, a treasure protected by time. At once the dragon woke, choking on fury. She huffed her hoard, winding herself around it, revulsion kindling within her, the sour scent of an enemy man, the footprints of a plunderer who'd blundered past her sleeping skull and seen her secret dreaming place. We all know stories like this one. A man unmarked by fate may sometimes cloak himself in God's grace, passing close to monsters unbeheld. The hoard holder fine-toothed the ground, fire foraging for the man who'd invaded her bedchamber. Wide she circled, planning his disemboweling, claw-mapping every inch of wilderness, though no man there to capture. She imagined a wild battle, flexed rapturously, then undulated into her lair to hunt again for the missing cup, only to rediscover the telltale evidence. Someone had desecrated her delights. Teeth gritted, she ticked until nightfall, that guardian of old gold and haunted history, her urge toward murder more intense by the moment. Eventually, ecstatic, she outlasted the light. Into darkness she emerged and put the world on blast, roaring into the sky, a comet of catastrophe. Villagers in the vicinity felt her attack first, their lands blackened, but soon it would be their lord and treasure giver suffering. The dragon swooped low and spat flame, destroying both manor and hovel, scrawling red RSVPs in the sky. The winged ringer had no time for survivors. She skywrote her grievances, then rewrote them roughly in landfire from end to end of HWÆT realm, her scaly helm shining as she sang insults from the clouds. Back to her ridge she whipped as the sun showed itself, slithering into her gold stock, locking herself away. She'd exhaled upon their ground, and now they burned. Black blood. Bah! She slept, trusting in human frailty to keep her lair unmolested. That trust would turn to dust, like everything. Soon Beowulf received a blistering missive. His own hall, his heart home, had combusted. He'd been ghost-throned by the sky-born gold holder. To the good man, this region's ring-giver, this was distress unbearable. Punishment, perhaps, from the Lord. Unjust? He worried, waited. Had he broken old covenants? Unwarded his soul? Doubt dawned as he considered deeds long done, sins kept secret. He wasn't used to feeling insecure. Meanwhile, the fire drake raked coast to coast with claws, charred gilded Geatland without pause, crimson blazes and black billows, until the old war king woke to action, plotting vengeance on the stranger. The foremost warrior projected for his own protection a myth-worthy shield, made entirely of iron. He knew no forest gift could defend him. His safety lay in smithy. Linden couldn't withstand lightning. Though Beowulf didn't predict he'd die in this fight, he and the dragon both, he'd always known that fate could that fate could fuck a fighter up, no matter the hordes he'd held, no matter the luck he'd had. The ring collector was too proud to bring a warband, to march an army against the firmament flyer. His plan would be his pyre. He imagined the dragon a dimwit, clocking neither her courage nor her grit. I mean, he had for years been up in it, persevering through pain and danger, countless grim battles since he'd saved Hrothgar and Heorot, since he'd rushed Grendel and all his kin, knocking that damned family to the mat. One of the worst of those hand-to-hand hells had been the one when Hygelac, Geat King, closest comrade, perished in Friesland. His skin became sheath for a sword, his skull a cup overflowing with blood. Beowulf saved himself only by swimming, fleeing the massacre by sea, bearing back as he swam 30 suits of armor torn from corpses he'd created. The Hetware had no joy of him, hiding their heads beneath their own splintering linden, as Beowulf ground them into cold sand. Few saw home again. Solitary, salt-scourged, he swam screaming over open ocean. Ecgtheow's son, repatriating grief-stricken to his homeland. That's right, he's Ecgtheow's son, not Hygelac's. He'd tried to quicken him with the throne, offering him gold, gemstones, a potent position, a life less lonely. Her own son she didn't trust to govern, to keep borders trussed against deploying hordes, now his daddy was dead. She couldn't convince Beowulf to step over Heardred, nor consent to come to her bed, but instead he offered his counsel to the boy king, until he was man enough to rule the Vedargeats himself. Soon thereafter, exiles appeared over the salt highway, Othere's sons, who'd raised a coup against the old wave king, Onela. He was the ruler of the Scylfings, had given gold from his kingdom seat, was master of their mead hall. Heedless, Heardred received the refugees, and traded his life for it, his reception repaid in regrets. A fatal flash of Onela's sword, and Hygelac's line was ended. The Swede king, satisfied, set off to the briny boulevard, and Beowulf, bereaved, ascended the Geat throne, in grief, never surrendering his reluctance to become the ruler. That was a good king. In later days, our man paid the killers in kills, avenging his dead prince by befriending Egils. I think it's Egils. It's one of the ones where it changes rules. Eadgils, sorry. I knew I was going to get messed up somewhere. Eadgils, that's right, it's a hard G with that one. In later days, our man paid the killers in kills, avenging his dead prince by befriending Eadgils, the last of the Swedish rebel sons. Beowulf sent him an army of sea-born swords, and tied a scarlet ribbon around the blood feud, exterminating Onela. Oh, and the one I got one of the names wrong here, I think. Octera. Octera. Soon thereafter, exiles appeared over the Salt Highway, Octera's sons. There we go. Have to remember there's a lot of these glottal things going on uh, with Old English. It's basically it's very Germanic. It's very Germanic. And unfortunately, I'm like not in that mode anymore, so I'm having to consciously remind myself. And so Ecgtheow's heir inherited a complement of king's qualifiers, dangers rare, treasures tragic, constant proofs of courage, excelling at every impossibility, until the day came for him to kill the dragon. The HWÆT king rode with 11 companions, firing himself into fury as he hunted the lair's location. By then he'd found the smoking gun, the embezzlement that had stoked the dragon's rage. The gilt cup had been brought to him by the burglar who'd begun this, and that thief, one life tilt, became the 13th man, rife with regrets, compelled to guide an expedition back to the scene of his crime. The unwilling guest of the king led the rest, in safety of daylight, to the hide he'd strayed into, a golden grave near salt shoals and trembling tides. Piled inside, like scales, were mounds of etched metal, detailed by the dead, along with a veteran guardian, who now never slept. She was the sole barrier to entry, but burrowed beneath the earth as she was, there was no simple way to bring death to her den. The old king fell to his knees on the cliff point and willed good fortune upon the Geats he'd ruled, those who'd sat fireside, warmed by his gold. Stricken, suddenly uneasy, he foresaw his fate in the fog, shrouded but uncertain. For a moment he felt for his old foes, fen-bound, embarking alone. Soon, soon, his own lease would expire, evicting him from hall, hearth, and home. Beowulf, Ecgtheow's own son, manned up, mastered himself, set it straight. I lived whole lives in my youth, endless combat, great wars. I remember every moment, even now. When I was 7, my father sent me out to sleep in the king's house. He dropped me on a new daddy, King Hrethel, who kept me safe, opened his hands, treated me, a fosterling, like his own sons. Never was I less dear to him than Herebeald, or even, oh Jesus, it's one of these. And of course, Hafkin, which is I forget the name of the grammatical term for a combined AE, THCYN. Hafkin. Herebeald. Never was I less dear to him than Herebeald, or Hafkin, or even my best beloved Hygelac. The eldest, Herebeald, tumbled into an early grave, done in by his brother. Hafkin tugged his bone bow, flinging a missile that missed the mark, shark-toothed his sibling's heart, a bloody thorn. There was no way to mourn for him, no vengeance to be had, for what could mitigate the blame? Who was left to shame for this heart-thieving? Nobody. It's the same sort of sorrow when a man outlives his son, sees him climb the gallows and swing, sentenced justly for crimes against the king. The father hollers out a sob to rapturing ravens, witnesses his boy swallowing dust, unable to plead his case. No settlement in silver can buy a child back from the gods of air. The father awakens disgraced, in despair thereafter, knowing his inheritor's been erased. He has no verve, no urge to visit beds, no wish to father a new son, now his firstborn's dead. He stares in sorrow at his child's empty room, hears the dreary wind that habits there now. His hall is silent, cheerless, hungry, hearth without coals, riders sagging in their saddles, heroes hidden where once singers sang and harps were fingered, where a yardful of sons were brothers, Abandoned on earth, left to live alone, with only sins to number, the grey king retreats to slumber, moaning dirges. What son? What wife? What life? What song? This was Hrethel, after Herebeald was dead. Ouch. Someone just poked me. This was Hrethel after Herebeald was dead. He couldn't beat the killer with blood feud rules, nor hate him for his wrongs. The murderer was not his preferred son, but still he was next in the now blot-blurred line. Hrethel walked away from the world, losing the plot, heart tortured, stone-faced. He marched alone into the flickering light of God, leaving what he had left to leave, bones, strongholds, and cold sod to his sons, as a rich man must. That old man was dust, but his old wars remained. Swedes and Geats got in each other's faces and fought ferociously. Hrethel dead, dark desires rising. Ongentheo's sons banded together, full of war wrath. On and on they came, keeping no peace from overseas, but twisting knives and words into ambush at the hill of Hroesas. My own killer kin avenged that. Sing it with me. You all know the story. But there was a cost. We lost Hathkin, Geat Lord, in that bloodbath, and Heorot, my own Heorot, drew his sword the next morning. He brought it down on Ongentheo, his brother's slayer, splitting his helmet, sending the old Swede to his death, drained, the dirt drinking his blood. Even his leathern fists, feud fortified, failed in fending off his fate. And me, I fought to repay the rings Heorot gave me, sword swift, debts edited in red. He gave me a greensward, rolling hills, a home of my own. He had no need to seek any superhero among the Gifthas, Swedes, or Spear Danes, no hired merc to secure his six. I was always there, his constant companion, marching ahead, first to charge. I was the soldier who kept my king shredding, the warrior who kept his queen wed. I was his man, until, well, I'm not dead yet. I'll lead while taking my last breath, as long as this sword stands by, even if I have to end with death. It's been my second in every battle since the very beginning. When I slew, oh my gosh, this is a new one. Dahreven. Yes, Dahreven. That is D-A-E combined, G-H-R-E-F-N. Dahreven. It's been my second in every battle since the very beginning, wherein I slew Dagrefen, the Hugas warrior, in a duel before both our armies. He brought no horde back to his ring lord, that flag waver, but instead fell bravely, not to my blade, but to my boldness. I wrung that man to death, my fists deep in his rib cage, my hands in his lungs, his bone vault broken. Now I'll use all I have, sword, fists, sharpened edge, honed heart, to engage the snake for this gold heap. Beowulf blasted his last boast. I laid my life down on the daily when I was your age. Now, grey guardian though I am, I'll show you how it's done. I'll kill this creature if it's the last thing I do. If it's no coward, it'll come out of its cave and face its challenger. He eyeballed each of his men, power-privileged warriors, for the last time. I'd go in without weapons, as I always have, if this weren't a dragon. I'd do it like a man, kill it bare-handed, like I killed Grendel so long ago. But mortal skin can't contend with a flame-spitting fiend, and so I go in sword-armed, taking shield and mail-shirt. I won't surrender when I see the beast, but fight it by the wall. and God will dictate which brawler wins. Get a good seat, boys, and look to the sky. Your job's to watch this flyer fall. I'm decided. Don't defy me. I've no more shade to throw on this serpent raider. Let the winner win. Let the loser get bent. My men, stay here atop the barrow. Wait with your war weapons. Watch and see who wins. Who can suffer more? Who can be worse wounded? Who can survive fire? This is my fight. I don't ask for intervention. None of you are strong enough to take this thing, to try to stake your manhood on doing a dragon. I'll be the one winning the gold, my bravery the broadest, and if not, boys, this'll be the battle that breaks your king. Beowulf stood tall, his iron shield upraised, armored in his own fame, his helmet, his mail shirt, his faith firm only in fate, a grit god bearing brute weight, beneath the rocky ledge. No trembling in his hands, but a strong salute. He'd survived worse than this, a veteran of foreign wars, of battle betrayals, of heartbreak, flung himself from cliffs over and over, surfaced singing. There, a stone arch, and there a stream rushing from the barrow's entry, a boiling geyser, furious fumes and flames. No one could live long in there, not without burning. Beowulf knew he couldn't fight inside the horde lair. The dragon's heat was horrific. He worked his wrath into a roar. The main man of the Vidergeats bellowed into the blast zone, calling forth his foe. Under the stone, warmth turned to war. An echoed challenge bounced. An echoed challenge bounced, and the dozing dragon lifted her head, alert with fury. A human voice! There'd be no negotiation, no settlement in metal. Fire walked first, dragon's breath surging out of the stones. Earth quaked as she rose and roared in return. The challenging mortal raised his shield as she emerged, a whipping wraith, a coil convulsing overhead, fangs, claws, and scales railing against robbery, ready for war. Beowulf's sword was already drawn, that razor edge, that razing heirloom. Each of them, living, was intolerable to the other, and in fury they fell to it. Feet planted, the people's provider held firm behind his shield, even as the serpent swirled, twisting and unfurling, her scales flame-swathed, flinging herself hard at fate, a flexing firework aimed straight at the king. His shield shirked its duty, keeping him safe for only moments. The famous warrior was, for the first time, naked. Another first. Beowulf had never before been quarry, God snubbed, fate forsaken, his glorious premeditated victory unwritten. The Geatlord raised a sooty fist and punched in panic at armored scales, as his sword slid, twisting against stony bones, his fang useless against volcanic dangers. It dawned on the king that he was afraid, his weapons forged without sorcery, his defenses all man-made. The horde guard rippled in rage, her mouth a fusillade of flames, so furious was she to feel even the dullest blade. Her war lanterns lit. Beowulf knew better than to expect victory. His sword, unmatched until this hour, splintered where it should have slain. His ageless iron had never been conquered, but now Ecgtheow's son found himself engaged in ebbing, loaded into a rattling cart and exiled to a darker country, though unwilling to go easy in the loss of long-held lodging. Everybody's got to learn sometime. Back at it again, the two battled furiously, the dragon renewed, rapturous, inhaling, uncoiling afresh. The man who'd been king was wreathed in flame. He knew his end was near. No one was coming, no seconds running to serve or save him, no ring-raised warriors. Those men, that former family, were sprinting from his screams, racing for safety, off the barrow and into the trees. But one man felt something, a bond that bound him back. He was kin, and could not leave his king to die alone. His name was Wiglaf, and he was Weohstan's son. What? No, sorry. It is Wiglaf, and it is Wechstan. That's right. OH is basically a CH equivalent. I have to keep remembering that. His name was Wiglaf, and he was Wechstan's son, that righteous warrior, that Shilfing kinsman of Alfheire. Wiglaf watched his king writhe beneath the heat of his flame-battered helmet, remembering the rings that king had given him, his comfortable home among the Vagmundings, his halcyon holdings and heritage, come down from his daddy. He could not run with the rest. He raised his linden shield and lifted his sword, a blade with lineage of its own, a weapon come from Eadmund, Ohthere's son, that exiled friendless one that Weohstan had killed in combat. He'd borne his victim's arms back to the dead man's kin, his engraved helmet, woven chainmail, and sword, giant forged. Onela returned the gear, ring gift to a kin killer, though slain Eadmund had been his nephew. Wechstan held the hostile horde for the rest of his life, helm, sword, shirt, until his son came of age and needed metal to prove his worth. When he was dying, grey and aged, embarking into the unknown, he showered Wiglaf in battle bounty. Geat witnessed. Now was the young warrior's first chance to align himself with his lineage, to fight for his father and for his ring lord. He had a strong spirit, and his inheritance was sharp as ever, a thing the serpent would learn when soon they met. Repulsed at their reluctance, Wiglaf sought to convince his companions. Bro, listen! Remember in the mead hall we swore to our lord we'd stand by him, swore to our ring giver we were worth his investment, that we'd bleed in our battle gear, given us for fighting, not strutting. He favored us from among the flock, gave us gifts, called us more than just mill-run warriors. I know he insisted he climb this hill alone, the head of our country, the best of men, but it's time for us to defy him. Get in the zone. He's falling. Do we watch him drop? No. Do we wait for his heart to stop, for him to die? No. Beowulf needs backup. On attack! Let's save our savior from those flames. I'd rather burn in a pyre alongside my ring giver than run home, arms untested against any enemy. My God, hear me! It beggars belief that we wouldn't even seek to slay this serpent, that we wouldn't try to tear our prince from its teeth. Men, I know if you don't, he deserves better than dragon fire, undefended by his own. We're sworn to go together. No? Well, then I'm going in alone, though my sword's nothing next to its skin. I'll bring my king my shield, helmet, shirt, and sword. He sprinted through fire, appearing armored alongside his lord, shouting, Beowulf, I'm beside you! You'll dare to risk it all and fight to the finish, as you did when you were young. You won't be bested while your heart beats. Your fame won't diminish. Your history's here. Be strong, my king. Your boy's with you in this fight. Be your country's shield, as I battle on your right. The dragon stanched any imminent surrender in herself, her wrath rekindled by her own unearthly serpent song. Her wrath rekindled, her own unearthly serpent song. She brought forth fire, blasting it at those nuisance humans, filthy, false-scaled, and intrusive. She scintillated sword and shield, flash burning Wiglaf's lindenwood to ash. His mail shirt was like linen to her, so he ducked under his kinsman's shield, still fighting. His king shared that steel umbrella, once the young warrior stood beside him, showered in sparks. Invigorated by the thought of victory, the king used all his strength to strike, lunging at possibility. Nagling was the victim of the swing, snapping like a straw. Beowulf's blood-tested blade was wrecked by dragon skin. It was not our man's weird to be assisted by sword, no, not by sharp edges, nor ancient iron, and his grey blade gave way under too strong a swing, shattered by too straight a stroke. Beowulf got no win from that weapon. Oh, sorry, it's nailing. Nailing, not nagling. Nailing was the victim of the swing, snapping like a straw. There we go. The third round sounded. The fire-breather rallied, rocketing from her corner, and diving at that warrior, driving needle fangs into his throat, shaking him like a captured flag. Beowulf went limp, his body wound-worn, drenched in his own dark lifeblood. Here's what I know. Wiglaf, Wehstan's son, saw his king collapsing, and showed his bloodline's bravery and Geat-born grit. His fighting hand was singed as he dodged the dragon's head, but he drove lower, spurning safety to spit the serpent's stomach with his ogre-etched sword. With that blade in her belly, she couldn't belch flame. Her fires sputtered. Now Beowulf, with his last strength, drew a dagger from his hip, a lethal hunting thorn, and dipped it into the dragon's side, wounding her fatally. Blade met body, a bleak and bitter fight. Together, these two slew their foe, courage conquering flight, and that duo, kin by blood and bone, did it side by side. Every warrior should step up to serve his lord, throw down regardless of odds. This was the last battle for the king, though, his final victory a grim one. The old warrior's wounds wept the dragon's legacy, scalding spit set by poisoned fangs, seething into sepsis. Beowulf knew he was a goner. His chest heaved with each heartbeat. He slumped against the wall, doomed but dignified, admitting defeat, easing his broken body down. He fixed his eyes on the stone of the hall, arches curving over tall columns, worked in an age before he'd lived, by giants long gone under. And his new battle brother, better than any of those others, hand-washed his king's wounds, serving sweetness even in this sorry state, unhelming him, bathing him, bringing him peace. Beowulf spoke, mortally wounded. Despite the doom diminishing his light, he unlocked his word vault. His time was waning. His brain was all he had left. In it, an ultimate ring gift to bequeath. Death drew close and knelt beside him. If I had ever had a son, I'd be giving him my armor now, but I never fathered one, never gave my blood to an heir, and so this death is final. I'm the last of me. I've been ruling here, fearless, for 50 winters. I was the man. No neighbor came to war. My name kept enemies at bay, and no one could scare me. I lived in peace, and released my lease on battle, knowing I had nothing to prove. I wasn't ambitious, never threw shade, never took shit, never spat curses when I felt wronged, but sat on the throne and weighed my people's woes and wishes. I have to say, I did okay. Now, as I lie dying, doomed by dragon, no one can claim I was a bad king. God can't call me a murderer, for I slew none of my kin. My boy, get a move on, and bring your lord's last request. I want to see what prize I won of this. Wiglaf, go under that stone, past where the dragon lies, wickedly wounded, her treasure targeted and taken. Climb into her hoard and count my gold. Hurry, I want to hold it. I want to know what I did, to look at my winnings, my gilded gifts, the grave goods of a gone people. I want to know it was worth it. My dying will be easier if I see what I died to do, garner a giant's treasure in exchange for my life. I'll let go, then, of all my holdings, my throne, my carefully guarded bones. Bro, here's how the story goes. Vextan's son went directly, obeying without question the command of his dying king. Still dressed in heavy vines of mail, he ran to bring his man satisfaction, ducking below the stony ledge into the barrow. He was victorious, battle brightened, and saw with shining eyes a trove of hoarded heaven, riches beyond compare, tapestries, piles of gold heaping the floor. That old moon splicing serpent's lair was full of ancient pitchers for pouring peace, goblets, cups, corroding without women to offer them up. Helmets red with rust, artfully twisted armbands without arms to hold. And oh, all that old gold, so long concealed, so long inviolate, wriggling back into the earth, despite the designs of those who'd hidden it. Wiglaf spied a standard, too, entirely woven of gold, suspended on the wall over the rest, more delicately wrought than any cloth he'd seen, glowing with illumination of its own, lighting the cave so he could inspect, itemizing the collection, imagine it emerging. The dragon was gone entirely, no sign she'd ever slept there, done to death by dagger, and driven into darkness. Then, so I'm told, that man plunged his hands into the hold, that ancient hoard of giant's gold, and filled his arms with feast gifts, plates, goblets, anything, everything his heart desired, taking also the standard, dragging the dragon's lantern down from the wall. I mean, bro, the dragon was dead. The old king's swing had made that certain. The one who'd guarded the glitz, who'd shown her love by littering the land with abandoned homesteads and burnt beds, who'd made midnight her inferno hour, she'd been split into serpent skin. Wiglaf made haste, driven by the treasure he carried, hoping his lord would still be living, though he'd been forced to leave him high and dry. He returned, arms full of bounty, to find his king bleeding out, pools of red, letting go of life. Wiglaf fell to his knees to drip water on the king's lips. The old man tried to speak, and the knife tip of a sentence stabbed from his locked lung vault. He stared at the gold, sorrowing. To God, the King, eternal throne holder, I sing my thanks. That you've let me look on this before I die, this gold, this get, it's enough. My people lose me, but gain a hoard gift. Say that on the day of my dying I went hard. I traded my life for this. It's a good bargain. My God, watch over my Geats. I'm going. These people are your people now. Shout my last orders. Tell my army to build a barrow before my body blazes, one like the dragon had, high up on the coast. I want it visible, towering like a giant's tooth on Whale's Cape, so that people know I was king, and so seafarers say my name, daily, nightly, call out, Beowulf's Barrow, as they pass in their tall ships, bound here over wild and misty waters. The king unlatched his heavy golden collar, handing it off to his young defender, giving him also his ornate helmet and war shirt, instructing him to wear them well. You're the end of the line, boy, the last standing Waymunding, sorry. Living has killed us all. We're dust-binned by destiny. My courageous clan of noble men have gone to ghost. Now I serve at their command. Those were the warrior's last words. He had no more wisdom, no more secrets, before he consigned himself to the pyre, the final battle fire for a body brutally broken. Beowulf's soul stepped from his breast to see what it could see. It was agony for the would-be savior, so young, to see his dear kinsman death-rattling on barren ground. The dragon, that deep dweller, lay dead as well, having done in her enemy. She was limp and lifeless, her looping spine and scales no longer lolling about piles of gold, no longer ring-guarding. Keen-edged blades, sweat-hammered and fervently filed, had bitten her, broken her of soaring flight, ended her adventures, leaving her stiff as a shovel-split snake, dead in the dark dirt beside a gilded grave. Never again would she soar through a starry sky, revel in rising rhapsody, rolling in and out of clouds and mist, a raging rainbow, glinting golden. She plummeted, earth-struck, blunted in blissful brutality by Beowulf. Hardly in history has there been a man born, or so I'm told, who, brawny and brave as men may be, would be able to battle such a one, to throw himself into her biting breath, or even creep into her lair for fortune's sake, and fearlessly find the treasure-keeper there, her eyes open, a wonder-ward. The ancient hoard had changed ownership now, bought by Beowulf's blood. Both he and his enemy had seen the edge of existence, tripped and fallen over it. It wasn't long before the forest-fled retainers attempted to regain their status, those 10 men who'd run for the hills, abandoning their king as the winged one was roaring in. The cowards, who'd put their blades behind their backs when he'd needed their strength, shambled out of the woods, shields lifted, armor still on, to where the old king lay collapsed. They found Wiglaf crumpled beside him, heart-sick, his shoulder to the shoulder of his lord, trying to wake him with water, but it was over. There was no will left in Beowulf, no life spark to be ignited. God had decided, as he always does, we all know it, and bro, nobody changes God's mind. The young warrior had words for them, though, terse words for the cowards who'd abandoned their king. Wiglaf, Wehstan's son, spat severity at the soldiers he'd found wanting. Anyone with half a brain's well aware that this king treated us like princes, giving us gifts, the gear that guards us even now. He opened his arms, offered all who stood in his mead hall armor, helmets, mail shirts, treasures. He treated us, his thanes, his sons, gave us the glories he'd won. But, hey, I guess he had no judgment. He threw those gifts away. What a fucking waste. In time of war, to armor and honor a corps of soldiers who'd ignore him when he needed them most. Our king had no cause to boast of his fight family. He never saw them fight. God allotted him a blow. He forced his blade into the fray, braver than all of you put together. I couldn't keep him safe, defending his flank, but God gave me strength to swing and help him. At least I, alone among these ranks, tried. My sword sank in, the enemy was injured, the dragon's fire oaths dimmed, her advances weaker, but I couldn't save him. Too few of you were loyal to our brave lord in time of trouble. Well, kiss it all goodbye, boys. Those treasures you hoarded, those gifts, those sparkling, unswung swords, the homes you held by kindness of our king, that shit is gone. Your families will founder. Your freeholds will fall the moment outland princes hear how you hid yourselves, disgraced your king, and let him die undefended. Are you warriors or weaklings? You should kill yourselves rather than live, having dealt him this damage. Wiglaf Wiglaf ordered that the battle's end be shouted out, bad tidings brought to the men camped at the ridge, retainers and unchosen warriors waiting heavy-hearted for reports. They'd spent the morning kneeling, nervous for their beloved lord, expecting all and any outcomes, king's death or return of the king. The messenger shouted truth, plainly, without hesitation. The rider sped to the headland, forecasting for all to hear. The people's prince, the Vader's lord and love, the Geat's good gold giver, is gone. The king is dead. The dragon did him in, but she's dead too, stretched beside him, an enemy slain by silver stabbing, a knife. Beowulf's sword could not kill her, no matter how he tried. Wiglaf is there now, with them both, Vexton's son, a survivor holding vigil for his dead, a warrior's wake for both the dear and the detested. Now, listen up, war's coming for us, for this country. Soon our enemies will hear our king's been killed. From sea to sea, everyone from Franks to Frisians will mobilize. Historic hatreds. The Franks have felt fury since Hygelac led a flotilla of warships into Friesland, though the HWÆT held him there, attacked him, and won with woeful odds. Our leader, battle-dressed, was taken then, his body falling, his army mourning. He gave no winnings to his fighting force. The Merovingians haven't forgiven us. No kindness will come from the Swedes either, only vow-breaking, peace pacts poisoned. Ongentheow, as everyone knows, slew Hæthcyn, Hrethel's boy, at Ravenswood, back when the Geats first attacked the battle Scilfings. Vengeance was swift for the Geat attacked. Ohthere's father was ferocious, a seasoned elder general. And he slashed that seafarer, Hæthcyn, and repossessed his own wife, mother to both Ohthere and Onela, who'd been kidnapped, golden rings wrung from her fingers. Ongentheow wasn't finished. He pursued his Geatish enemies, driving them, panicked and bereft of their leader, to Ravenswood, where he and his company ran rings around the remnants, reminding them how weak they were. Through the black hours he swore at them, promising punishments, telling them when the sun rose he'd shine his sword on selected scalps, and string other soldiers from the gallows, make them treacle sweets for birds' beaks. But at dawn, when they were despairing, they heard the horn of Hygelac, and that hero came for them, following their trail with troops. The Swedes and Geats battled and ploughed a bloody path, identifiable for miles, and no one, not even fools, could think them finished fighting. The old man plotted murder and made a move, retreating with his people. Ongentheow knew higher ground would help him, but he knew too that Hygelac was hard, famous for his fight skills. The old man couldn't hold long against the sea warriors, not while keeping his wife, children, and followers safe. He dammed them in behind sheltering walls, but Hygelac's men breached them, pouring into the sanctuary like floodwater, drowning camp and confines. Ongentheow stood firm, grey and proud, but he was trapped, surrounded by swords, and Eofor was appointed the Swede king's judge and jury. Wulf, Wonred's son, rushed the old man in rage, and struck him so that the blood soaked his hair. Still he did not back down, but raised his own sword, and hacked harder than he'd been hit. The Swede king spun and struck, fighting for his people. Wonred's son couldn't take him, brave Wulf though he was, and his blows glanced off, until Ongentheow split his helmet and forced him to flee, falling, head bloodied, dazed though not dead. He was hurt, but he held, and finally his brother, Hygelac's loyal thane, Eofor, lifted his own sword, an ancient piece etched in ogre runes, and smashed it into the old man's giant-forged helmet, slashing past his shield. At last Ongentheow fell, the defender of his realm, done and gone. Everyone ran to assist Wulf, to bandage him and carry him from the field. Now they were custodians of the bloody mud. The walking warrior stripped Ongentheow of his gear, his iron mail, his fierce sword, his helmet, and ferried all this war treasure to Hygelac, who took the offering, and said the giver would be repaid. He told the truth, and for their courage Hrethel's heir, now king of the Geats, gave Eofor and Wulf 100,000 each in land gifts and interlocked rings of wealth to ratchet them up in status. That was a good king. None could critique his open hands. He also gave over to Eofor his only daughter, a bedmate to bind him, a kin bond and vow of loyalty. So, to sum it up, the feud with the Swedes isn't over, and needs only this blood to activate it again. A border swarm, a war walking into Geatland, the moment they learn that Beowulf is gone. He's been keeping us safe for decades, counting coffers, battening the kingdom against invaders, defending his citizens, and all the while killing monsters too. Come now, and hurry, men, send him on his journey, pay him our respects, and carry our king and ring-giver to his funerary rites. His pyre will be built, heaped with gold for melting, which he won with his life. The death hoard is too heavy for our hearts, and it will be burned along with him who won it. That gold isn't for decorating followers, not for starring the bosoms of young women, or latching in memory onto loyal throats. No, now is a time for mourning, for walking downcast the exile's road, grey-garbed and grim, for the king is dead, his song is silence, his laughter and entertainment forgotten. Take down your spears and touch that dawn-chilled metal. Raise them toward a clouded world. No harp music will play to call warriors in, but instead will waken to the raven, a rush of black wings, telling in raw song how she's watched the wolf and eagle worrying our dead, carrion clawed, competing over the feast. That was the end of the forecast, and the augur wasn't wrong. That messenger delivered it as evenly as such bad news can be delivered. The troop was weeping, but they rose, and went in woeful rows to Eagle's Cape, where, on the cold sand, they found their king, soul long spent, that man who'd given them everything he had, whose rings had warmed their hands. It was the end of his epic, the climactic close, and Beowulf, their warrior king, died mighty. They saw him beside a wrathful wonder, a sky dragon become ground ghost. That flame-spitter, scourge of those coasts, had been scathed and sooted by her own song. She was 50 feet long, she who'd ruled in riving rapture over their dreaming hours, diving through dawns to nest with her treasure. Now death had won her. The worm could no longer writhe with coins, but with worms. The worm would no longer writhe with coins, but with worms. Beside her lay the dragon's dowry, grave good goblets and cups, dishes and knives, rust devouring them now, though they'd spent 1,000 winters serving the ghosts of powerful men. There was a spell on the hoard, left by a skeleton tribe, a ward that said no man could touch it, unless God, glory dispenser and hoarder of humanity, chose a hero and gave permission for the treasures to disperse. What had he hoped, the man who'd pressed his people's precious things into a cave beneath the cape? All his keeping came to nothing. First, the dragon killed the king, then the king killed the dragon. Maybe a man's mighty, maybe he's known to all as a warrior, but death has his number. No one knows when it'll be called, when he'll have to walk backward out of the beer hall, exiled from life. So it was for Beowulf, when he sought battle in a barrow. Sure, the grave guardian was formidable, but our hero had no notion he was falling out of earth. The curse on that stony womb was set by men who'd impregnated it with treasure, claiming the confines theirs until doomsday. If they couldn't possess them, no one could. If they couldn't possess them, no one could. Any man who thieved was fated to perish, pushed into pagan places, punished forever. Beowulf never imagined gold could bring grief. He forgot. Not all gifts are forgetting. Wiglaf, Wehstan's son, took the floor. One man slipped down this slope, he alone deciding. But we rest are roped to him. Many will suffer similar fates now. No counselor could convince our king, our old and beloved protector, that he shouldn't come at the guardian of this gold, but instead let her dream unmolested, drowsing alongside her beloved hoard, ground nested until world's end. Beowulf's fate was written, too. He opened the barrow and showed us its bounty, but he paid in blood and bone. His destiny was too tempting, and it drew him here. I've been inside, counted treasures heaped in the dark, given my ticket to voyage, solitary, under tons of soil. I heaved a heap of heart-won gold into my arms, precious beyond compare, and bore it here to share with my king. I carried all this treasure to where Beowulf could view it. He was alive then, though fading. He listed his longings, his last commands, bade me welcome you, man by man, and bid you build a barrow great enough to justify his gifts and his going. He wanted a memorial built to last, to light the future, because of all men who've ever lived, he was the strongest, and the bravest, and the brightest, and the best. Now come with me. Let us look on the treasure together, piled against the wall. I'll lead you to the dragon's lair and show you, up close, the golden ornaments, so you'll know what your king died for. Meanwhile, let the bier be readied, so when we emerge we can carry Beowulf to it, lay him upon our love, and send him to his new hall under the throne of the Lord. Is it beer? It might be beer. It's the thing you carry a body on. I can't remember how that's pronounced off the top of my head. That one snuck up on me. If someone tuning in does know, feel free to leave it in the comments or message me immediately. Wehstan's son, courageous as ever, ordered heroes and hall holders to the forest to chop logs and splinter trees. All those men, with men of their own, collected kindling for the king. Now he'll be consumed. Let a white and brilliant flame catch our leader. Let the fire take him, our famous man, who's fought off slings and arrows, who battled armies, who never backed down. At last a shaft sounded his depths, pursuing the barb as it primed his heart, feathers fanning across his breast. The son of Wehstan summoned 7 of the best men to descend again into darkness, and went alongside them, the 8th man entering that cursed place. One soldier, the man in front, carried a light. No one sought to gamble or grab. The guard was gone, and the challenge was pointless. They carried it all out, dazzle draped, a heaving hoard of gore-bought gold, unprotected, and piled it in public. It was easy to enact their leader's last wish. Then they heaved the dragon over the cliffs into the sea, brine bedding that beast bride, that ring taker. The endless accursed treasures they stacked on a cart, and bore them with their dead leader, his skin gone grey as a barnacle, to Whale's Cape. The Geats began the pyre, howling over Beowulf, their best brother, hanging hoard helmets about it, shields and steel shirts, as he'd insisted. They placed him in the center of all this treasure, their lost love, and built a bone fire worthy of men's ends. Storm smoke shuddered from the blaze thick and dark, and the flames keened louder than any man's weeping. The whipping winds momentarily stilled, until Beowulf's heart-helm broke. His bones blackened as his boys bellowed their grief. Then another dirge rose, woven uninvited by a gayetish woman, louder than the rest. She tore her hair and screamed her horror at the hell that was to come. More of the same. Reaping, raping, feasts of blood, iron fortunes marching across her country, claiming her body. The sky sipped the smoke and smiled. The Geats got down to it, driving the materials of the memorial into a mound, a promontory crowned with Beowulf's marker, lit so sailors could see it from afar. 10 days it took to make their hero's new home. It contained, walled up, the remnant of his hoard gold, wrought to remain long after Geats were gone. Rings of kings and torques, jewels clouded with black smoke, the dragon's darlings. And before her that lost tribes, a trove of treasure trespass cursed from out of earth, now gone to ground again. They covered it over with gravel, and I hear it's there still, a left-over lament, lacking living hands for spending. 12 thanes, battle-tested sons of worthy men, took themselves to horseback, and coursed around the tomb, weeping, wringing the old songs from their tongues, dirge chanting, telling the legend of Beowulf, their king. His courage, his fury, his wars. They did all this grieving the way men do, but, bro, no man knows, not me, not you, how to get to goodbye. His guys tried. They remembered the right words. Our king, lonely ring wielder, inheritor of everything. He was our man, but every man dies. Here he is now, here our best boy lies. He rode hard, he stayed thirsty. He was the man. He was the man. And that was Beowulf, a new translation by Maria Dahvana Headley. So yeah, that's that's her translation of Beowulf. I do have here now, though, her introduction, which has a bunch of footnotes, which I am going to have to do because they provide further uh, background, and it is a long one. Let me get that bookmark at the end of it there, so I have some idea what I'm in for, and let me get a little water in me, and we'll get cracking on that. Introduction. My love affair with Beowulf began with Grendel's mother, the moment I encountered her in an illustrated compendium of monsters. And there's a footnote. I wish I could tell you which compendium of monsters it was. Hunts have revealed 2 images that may have been conflated into the version I remember. Brian Froud and Alan Lee's Fairies contains an assortment of eldritch figures from English folklore, among them the nightmare-provoking 2-page spread of Jenny Greenteeth and Peg Powler, both child-eating greenish river hags, each depicted solo, partially immersed. Neither of these align wholly with my memory, they're unarmed, but they're similar to other, monstrous, depictions of Grendel's mother. However, I grew up in a house full of art books. My mother's a painter. J.R. Skelton's illustration of Grendel's mother from Stories of Beowulf depicts a greenish, profoundly muscular warrior woman kneeling atop a golden-armored Beowulf, raising her saix to slay him. It's very much like the paintings of the heroic Judith, beheading Holofernes and posing with her sword, I saw around the same time, and it's possible that all these ingredients converged into the Grendel's mother I remember. On a less literary, but incidentally very Beowulf-related note, add some Sigourney Weaver from Alien to this. All that said, I spent a lot of my childhood in library corners, looking at books no one knew I was looking at. It's still possible the image I remember exists out there somewhere. If you find it, let me know. And now we're back to the main text. We are less than 3 lines in, and we've already had a footnote that's spread across 2 pages. A slithery greenish entity. So, my love affair with Beowulf began with Grendel's mother the moment I encountered her in an illustrated compendium of monsters. A slithery greenish entity standing naked in a swamp, knife in hand. I was about 8 and on the hunt for any sort of woman warrior. Wonder Woman and She-Ra were fine, but Grendel's mother was better. She had a ferocious look and seemed to give precisely 0 fucks. Not that I had that language to describe her at that point in my life. In the book I first saw her in, there was no Grendel, no Beowulf, no 50 years a queen. She was just a woman with a weapon, all by herself in the center of the page. I imagined she was the point of whatever story she came from. When I finally encountered the actual poem, years later, I was appalled to discover that Grendel's mother was not only not the main event, but also, to many people, an extension of Grendel rather than a character unto herself, despite the significant ink devoted to her fighting capabilities. It aggravated me enough that I eventually wrote a contemporary adaptation of Beowulf, The Mere Wife, a novel in which the Grendel's mother character is a protagonist, a PTSD-stricken veteran of the United States wars in the Middle East. That might have been the end of it, but by that point I'd tumbled head over heels into Beowulf itself, and was, like everyone who ever translates it, obsessed. It's a somewhat unlikely object of obsession, this thousand-ish-year-old epic. Beowulf bears the distinction of appearing to be basic. 1 man, 3 battles, lots of gold, while actually being an intricate treatise on morality, masculinity, flexibility, and failure. It's 3,182 lines of alliterative wildness, a sequence of monsters and would-be heroes. In it, multiple old men try to plot out how to retire in a world that offers no retirement. Hoarders of all kinds attempt to maintain control of people, halls, piles of gold, and even the volume of the natural world. Queens negotiate for the survival of their sons, attempt to save their children by marrying themselves to warriors, and, in one case, battle for vengeance on their sons' murderers. Graying old men long for one last exam to render them heroes once and for all. The phrase, "that was a good king," recurs throughout the poem, because the poem is fundamentally concerned with how to get and keep the title good. The suspicion that at any moment a person might shift from hero into howling wretch, teeth bared, causes characters ranging from shopes to ring lords to drop cautionary anecdotes. Does fame keep you good? No. Does gold keep you good? No. Does your good wife keep you good? No. What keeps you good? Vigilance. That's it. And even with vigilance, even with courage, you might still go forth to slay a dragon, or, if you're Grendel, slay a Dane, die in the slaying, and leave everyone and everything you love vulnerable. The world of the poem, a fantastical version of Denmark in the 5th to early 6th century and the land of the Geats in present-day Sweden, is distant, but the actions of the poem's characters are familiar. As much as Beowulf is a poem about then, it's also, and always has been, a poem about now, and how we got here. The poem is, after all, a poem about willfully blinkered privilege, about the shock and horror of experiencing discomfort when one feels entitled to luxury. There are many translations out there, enough that you could read one a day for months and not repeat. They make up a startlingly diverse corpus of interpretations and styles, with the occasional screeching veer into new plot points. How about the transgressive and fairly persuasive notion that the last survivor of a forgotten tribe, in burying his people's gold, transforms by curse into the dragon? And there's a footnote here. This tempting theory is from Raymond Tripp's The Dragon King of Beowulf, published in 2005 in Geardagum, and also dealt with in More About the Fight with the Dragon, which is by Lanham, M.D., University Press of America, 1983. It's not unprecedented. In Iceland's Volsunga saga, Fafnir starts out a dwarf and ends up becoming a dragon due to cursed gold. Perhaps, for a translator, more pragmatically, shapeshifting the last survivor into the dragon makes sense of difficult pronouns in that section, which create consistent bafflement about which character is being referenced: the dragon, the last survivor, or the thief. And now we're back to the main text. Every English language translator's take on how to translate this text is motivated by different ideas of how to use modern English to convey things inexpressible in it. This translation, for example, was completed during the first months of my son's life. Parenting a baby is listening to someone use a language in which certain sounds mean a slew of things, and one must rely heavily on context to gain clarity. A language in which there is no way to translate accurately the ancient sound that means hungry, because, to the pre-verbal speaker, the sound means and is used to signal a compendium of things, something more like belly hurt, longing, breast, empty mouth, bottle, swallow, milk, help. While this gloss is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, it's not far from the actuality of Old English translation. It's possible to make a case for more than one definition of many words, and the challenge is to land on an interpretation that braids rationally into the narrative, without translating a male warrior into a bear, or a woman warrior into a literal sea-wolf, rather than a metaphoric one. And there's another footnote here. I do think both those interpretations are incorrect, but one of them is a generally accepted truth of text, a supporting argument for monstrosity in Grendel's mother. The other interpretation would these days be considered an embarrassing, though delightful, error. Almost no one thinks that by Beorn, and indeed by Beowulf, as in bee-wolf, as in honey-eater, as in bear, the poet meant Beowulf to be, even partially, a bragging, talkative bear. Never mind our hero's supernatural strength and capacity to swim long distances, dive, and hold his breath for a full day. It'd be fun, though, an armored, perpetually unwed bear, a predecessor of Philip Pullman's Panzerbjorn, especially in a narrative already populated with wonders. Panzerbjorn. Friedrich Panzer's, no relation to Eirik Byrnenson's tribe, 1910 Bear's Son thesis surveying possible folkloric lineage for the Beowulf story is a highly recommended story zone. And if we felt like it, we could wander for a long time in bear cult ties. Check out Richard Neil Coffin's 1962 PhD dissertation, Beowulf and its Relationship to Norse and Finno-Ugric Beliefs and Narratives. Boston University. In warriors buried on bearskins with hounds and gold beside them, in notions of Beowulf as stealth berserker. Back to the text. You must choose wisely, and then, somehow, structure those wise or frustrated choices into poetry. With this text, perfection is impossible. The poem was written in the language we now call Old English, sometime between the mid-7th and end of the 10th centuries, and exists in a lone manuscript copy, the Noel Codex. The version contained therein was written down sometime between AD 975 and 1025 by two scribes, A and B, with different handwriting and different tendencies toward error. Add to this the fact that the manuscript isn't intact. Bits of poem were lost over the centuries, first in the gestation of the written version itself, which was at the mercy of memory and, presumably, mead, and later in a library fire in 1731, which badly singed the edges of the manuscript. It was rebound in the late 19th century, and in the interim its edges crumbled beyond resurrection. Worms feasted. Least visibly and most significantly, scribal emendations changed the nature of the story in both subtle and unsubtle ways. Footnote. In the original manuscript, for example, Scribe A wrote that Grendel was doomed because he was descended from Chama's kin, or Ham's kin. That got scratched out, presumably by Scribe B, and replaced with Cain's kin, Cain's kin. Subsequent references to Abel make a case for that palimpsestic edit, and for the curse, which makes of Cain a fugitive wanderer. Grendel, of course, isn't a wanderer. His, and his mother's, home address is well known to Hrothgar, so he's not exactly a fugitive either. Biblically, Ham's kin also got cursed, because Noah's son Ham saw a drunken, naked Noah. It's up for grabs what that seeing actually consisted of, and so Noah cursed Ham's kin with servitude. The notion of Noah's curse on Ham persevered over the centuries into the still-cited American insistence that slavery is ideologically justified by the Bible, and onward into the potential queerness of Ham being justification for homophobia. 2-for-1 biblical bias support. Notions of other lineage may be applied to Grendel either way, but the two curses, while often conflated, are different. One curse makes of Grendel a fugitive, the other a slave. Neither gives us the full story of Grendel's grievance, but the cursed lineage has often been used to simplify Grendel's identity through association, rendering him irrationally and indubitably evil, rather than someone provoked by specific Danes. For more on this topic, see Toni Morrison's Grendel and His Mother, collected in The Source of Self-Regard, Selected Essays, Speeches, and Meditations. Back to the text. Gaps were plugged with metric maybes, and lacunae inserted into lines that appear whole, to make sense of shifts in tone. All this is to say that Beowulf has been wrangled with, wrung out, and reworked for centuries. It's been written upon almost as much by translators and librarians as it was by the original poets and scribes. The original Beowulf was composed by an author who imagined a world in which a monster is infuriated by loud music, a dragon ripples luxuriously about beloved gold, an elderly woman is able to make viable physical war against all the king's men, and a young warrior can hold his breath for a full day while fighting sea monsters, winning his battle only because God shines a spotlight on a slaying sword. A perfect translation would require the translator to time travel fantastically rather than historically, more Narnia than Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. As if this weren't enough, the language of the poem is as much a world-building tool as the plot is, engineered with the poet's own anachronistic filter, an archaic lyric lexicography. And there's another footnote here. And who was this poet, anyway? No one knows. Someone alive at some point in a 3-century swath. Someone, probably, in England. Probably not a woman, but again, who knows? The poet was certainly a genius. Genius defies gender. Genius defies gender. The idea that there are only a couple of poems in the Old English corpus that could plausibly have been written by female poets, specifically The Wife's Lament and Wolf and Eadwasser. I can't remember how that would be pronounced. Anyway, both because of point of view is a ridiculous one. The notion that women write only about women's business is equally ridiculous, as indeed is the idea that there is such a circumscribable arena as women's business at all. A wonderful thing one learns when one writes about imaginary kingdoms for a living is that, in fact, anyone can imagine anything, and if the writer is good, they can do it persuasively. Back to the text. Uh, so I think she's going to touch on this. Yes, she does. Very good. She does cover the first line, which I'm going to mispronounce the crap out of because it's been so long. It has been many years, and I was not super into this stuff then, so it's sort of passed me by, I regret to say. If you wish to translate, not rewrite Beowulf, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in 1940, your language must be literary and traditional, not because it is now a long while since the poem was made, or because it speaks of things that have since become ancient, but because the diction of Beowulf was poetical, archaic, artificial, if you will, in the day the poem was made. Tolkien and I wouldn't have agreed when it comes to the sort of language required for a translation of Beowulf. As someone who's read his translation of Beowulf, let me tell you, they're pretty different. She's right about that. Uh, Perceptions of literary and traditional language vary widely depending on who's doing the perceiving, and Tolkien had a liking for the courtly that I do not share. But we agree that the original's dense wordplay must be reckoned with. Among a slew of regressions in the past half-decade, I must cite a win: the democratization of information. Access to formerly gate-kept texts has been radically broadened. Until recently, it was a cotton-gloved privilege to view the original manuscript of Beowulf. Now, with a click, and there you are, looking at the handwriting 1,000 years old. What? Ve gardena ingeardagum. Word I can't pronounce. Word I can't gefronon. Oh, what is that thing? It's like if you stacked a B on top of a P. I can't remember the name of this. This is stuff I all used to know, and I used to be able to pronounce this because I had to, or I wouldn't have passed the class. Oh no! Getting old sucks. Not old. I remember individual bits, like I remember the whale road, the bone cage, the bone hold, a few other things. Not only is the original accessible to anyone with an internet connection, so are a huge number of translations and volumes of evolving scholarship, many long out of print. This translation exists because of that access. It is both it is both pleasurable and desirable to read more than one translation of this poem, because when it comes to translating Beowulf, there is no sacred clarity. What the translated text says is a matter of study, interpretation, and poetic leaps of faith. Every translator translates this poem differently. That's part of its glory. And so I offer to the banquet table this translation, done by an American woman born in the year 1977, a person who grew up surrounded by sled dogs, coyotes, rattlesnakes, and bubbling natural hot springs nestled in the wild high desert of Idaho, a person who, if we were looking at the poem's categories, would fall much closer in original habitat to Grendel and his mother than to Beowulf or even the lesser denizens of Hrothgar's court. I came to this project as a novelist, interested specifically in rendering the story continuously and clearly, while also creating a text that feels as bloody and juicy as I think it ought to feel. Despite its reputation to generations of unwilling students, forced as freshmen into arduous translations, ding ding ding, Beowulf is a living text in a dead language, the kind of thing meant to be shouted over a crowd of drunk celebrants. Even though it was probably written down in the quiet confines of a scriptorium, Beowulf is not a quiet poem. It's a dazzling, furious, funny, vicious, desperate, hungry, beautiful, mutinous, maudlin, supernatural, rapturous shout. In contrast to the methods of some previous translators, I let the poem's story lead me to its style. The lines in this translation were structured for speaking, and for speaking in contemporary rhythms. The poets I'm most interested in are those who use language as an instrument, inventing words and creating forms as necessary, in the service of the voice. I come from the land of cowboy poets, and while theirs is not the style I used for this translation, I did spend a lot of time imagining the narrator as an old-timer at the end of the bar, periodically pounding his glass and demanding another. I saw it with my own eyes. A brief and general word about meter and style tropes. Early English verse is distinguished by both alliteration and stress patterns over a caesura. In oral versions, the caesura is a pause. On the page, a gap between the two halves of a line. Each half line contains two stressed syllables. The two stressed syllables in the first half alliterate with in the first half line alliterate with the first stressed syllables in the second. Rhyme is used in Beowulf, but less predictably. It's typically used to emphasize sequences, waves crashing against a shore, for example. And stylistically, a Beowulf employs a variety of compound words, or kennings, to poetically describe both the commonplace and the astounding. Hence, we've got some wonderful and distinctive things. Whale road for sea, battle sweat for blood, sky candle for sun. Like everyone who's ever translated this text, I had some fun. After reading a variety of translations mimicking early English meter and attempting a version myself, I decided that corpse-littered hill wasn't one I wished to die on. Likewise, attempts to translate this text into other meters, which have typically yielded inadvertent hilarity. At some point, I encountered A. Diedrich Wackerbarth's 1849 ballad translation. And there is a footnote here. Read Chauncey B. Tinker's exuberantly claws out The Translations of Beowulf, a Critical Bibliography, from 1903, for a catalogue and critique of Beowulf translations, verse, prose, fragments, and paraphrases up to 1902. Of Wackerbarth's translation, Tinker shudders. It would seem that if there were a measure less suited to the Beowulf style than the Miltonic blank verse used by Conybeare, it would be the ballad measures used by Wackerbarth. The movement of the ballad is easy, rapid, and garrulous. Now, if there are three qualities of which the Beowulf is not possessed, they are ease, rapidity, and garrulity. But there is still another reason for shunning them. They are almost continuously suggestive of Sir Walter Scott. Of all men else, the translator of Beowulf should avoid Scott. Very catty. At some point, I encountered A. Diedrich Wackerbarth's 1849 ballad translation, here quoted in the introduction of Grendel's Mother. The mother fiend, a soul had she, blood greedy like the gallows tree, and she for deadly vengeance' sake will now the battle undertake. I didn't desire to graft peach branches to a cactus, or vice versa, and so I gave myself leave to play with all the traditional aspects, preserving many kennings and inventing some of my own, while also employing the sensibilities of a modern poet rather than an ancient one. This translation rhymes in a variety of ways, including the occasional heroic couplet. I love raucous rhyme schemes and rampant alliteration, and the near universally derided line from John Richard Clark Hall's 1901 translation, 10 timorous troth breakers, delights me. Sure, it's undignified. Sure, it's nasty. But so are the runaway warriors it references. It does work. 10 timorous troth breakers. It's literally correct. Like, it does in fact accurately describe the situation. There's 10 of them, they're timorous, and they broke a troth. Simple. They didn't come up and assist our boy. My alliteration and embedded rhyme often rolls over line breaks, which would be forbidden in early English metric rules. In this translation, though, I wanted the feeling of linguistic links throughout. The poem employs time passing and regressing, future predictions, quick History 101s, neglected bits of necessary information flung, as needed, into the tale. The original reads, at least in some places, like Old English freestyle, and in others like the wedding toast of a drunk uncle who suddenly remembered a poem he memorized at boarding school. Sorry. There are noble characters in Beowulf, but the poem itself is not noble. There is elevated language in Beowulf, but the poem feels populist. It's entertaining, episodic, and full of wonders. As I constructed the persona of the narrator, other things about the poem fell into place. The insistent periodic recaps for a distracted multi-night audience, the epithets and adamant character calibrations interspersed throughout. That was a good king. I emphasized those things where I found them, both for the mnemonic aid factor and for the feeling of a communal, colloquial history. There has been much debate about the level to which the translated text should be archaized to emphasize for modern readers the alien landscape of early English verse, and specifically to what degree translators should mimic the poet's own choice to use words already archaic and poetic at the time of the poem's composition. In some cases, the urge to archaize won soundly over the urge to make sense. Thus, there are plenty of crinolined forsooth and ween, W-E-E-N, ween, ridden translations to choose from, should the reader be so inclined, as well as a series of Scots-tinged selections. Mickle has tempted many, as has the hunger for twixt, and though much of this is attested in the Old English, in translation one can easily devolve into a peculiar Elizabethan pastiche. Given that both poetic voice and communicative clarity are my interests here, my diction reflects access to the entirety of the English word hoard. Some of these words legitimately archaic or underknown, coarse, seer, schlerite. Others recently written into lexicons of slang or thrown up by new cultural contexts. Swole, stan, hashtag blessed. And already fading into, if not obscurity, uncertain status. Language is a living thing, and when it dies, it leaves bones. I dropped some fossils here, next to some newborns. I'm as interested in contemporary idiom and slang as I am in the archaic. There are other translations, if you're looking for the language of courtly romance and knights. This one has life tilt and rode hard, stayed thirsty in it. Back I come for that reason to HWÆT. It's been translated many ways. Listen, hark, lo. Seamus Heaney translated it as so, an attention-getting intonation, taken from the memory of his Irish uncle telling tales at the table. Footnote here saying, see Heaney's wonderful introduction to his Beowulf A New Verse translation from '99. Is it really that recent? I could have sworn it was older. I'm losing my mind. I don't remember now. I come equipped with my own memories of sitting at the bar's end listening to men navigate darts, trivia, and women, and so in this book I translate it as bro. The entire poem, and especially the monologues of the men in it, feels to me like the sort of competitive conversations I've often heard between men, one insisting on his right to the floor while simultaneously insisting that he's friendly. Bro is, to my ear, a means of commanding attention while shuffling focus calculatedly away from hierarchy. Depending on tone, bro can render you family or foe. The poem is about this notion, too. Marital pacts are made and catastrophes ensue. Kingdoms are offered and rejected. Familial bonds are ensured not with blood, but with gold. When I use bro elsewhere in the poem, whether in the voice of Beowulf, Hrothgar, or the narrator, it's to keep us thinking of the ways that family can be sealed by formulation, the ways that men can afford, or deny, one another power and safety by using coded language, and erase women from power structures by speaking collegially only to other men. There's another way of using bro, of course, and that is as a mean of satirizing a certain form of inflated, overconfident, aggressive male behavior. I think the poet's own language sometimes does that, periodically weighing in with commentary about how the men in the poem think all is well, but have discerned nothing about blood relatives' treachery and their own heathen helplessness. Is this text attempting to be a manual for successful masculinity? No, although at a glance it appears to be a hero story. Beowulf is a manual for how to live as a man, if you are, in fact, more like the monsters than the men. It's about taming wild, solitary appetites, and about the failure to tame them. It is not, in the poet's opinion, entirely to Beowulf's credit that he continues wild and solitary into old age. Compare him with another old man, Ongentheow, whose long-form story is told by the messenger bringing ill tidings to Beowulf's people after Beowulf's death. That old man, though an enemy to the Geats, is depicted as responsible to his wife, children, and people, battling strategically on their behalf, thinking of their safety even as he is cornered and killed. The humans in Beowulf are communal, battling together, leaders alongside lesser-ranked warriors. Those who are superhuman, or supernatural, Grendel, his mother, the dragons, and Beowulf, the dragons singular, and Beowulf, battle solo and are ultimately weakened by their wild solitude. There's a geomythological theory that the larger-than-life men in this poem, Hygelac, mentioned in other texts as a giant, Beowulf, Grendel, came into the poetic imagination due to medieval discoveries of fossilized mammoth bones, which, when incorrectly reassembled, look like nothing so much as tremendous human skeletons. I believe, yes, that lines up with what I know, how years back someone saw either a mammoth skull or a mammoth skeleton or elephant skeleton, um, and were like, "Oh, this is definitive proof that there really were cyclops," because in the middle of it, in the middle of the skull, there's like this big hole, which is where the nose comes out. But they're like, "Oh, that's clearly where the eye went." So. Also get a similar effect by looking at the skull of a hippopotamus. It looks like some hell-sent dragon demon. And then you look at an actual hippo, and they're rather unassuming. But they've got all that under there. They live the role that their skull indicates. If you're out in Colombia, watch out on the river. Be careful out there, guys. They're breeding. Where were we? Oh yes. So there's a footnote here saying, "See Timothy J. Burberry, Fossil Folklore in the Liber Monstrorum, Beowulf and Medieval Scholarship, Folklore 126, number 3, 2015. See also Adrienne Mayer, The First Fossil Hunters, Dinosaurs, Mammoths, and Myth in Greek and Roman Times, Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University Press, 2001. Back to the text. The theory is tempting in a variety of ways, among them the notion that these giant men were literally made of monsters. These physical mistranslations bear some similarity to the poem's construct and interrogation of impervious masculinity. An emotional wound can send a previously powerful man into a swift, suicidal tailspin. See Hrethel and Hrothgar, and even Beowulf rushing solo at a dragon, attempting to prove himself to an audience of young men who turn out to be mostly cowards. Beowulf is usually seen as a masculine text, but I think that's somewhat unfair. The poem, while, with one exception, not structured around the actions of women, does contain extensive portrayals of motherhood and peace-weaving marital compromise, female warriors, and speculation on what it means to lose a son. In this translation, I work to shine a light on the motivations, actions, and desires of the poem's female characters, as well as to clarify their identities. While there are many examples of gendered inequality in the poem, there is no shortage of female power. Grendel's mother, my original impetus for involvement with this text, is almost always depicted in translation as an obvious monster rather than a human woman, and her monstrosity doesn't typically allow even for partial humanity, though the poem itself shows us that she lives in a hall, uses weapons, is trained in combat, and follows blood feud rules. Ogress, inhuman troll wife, Tolkien from 1926. That female horror, hungry fiend. Raffle, 1963. Ugly troll lady. Trask, 1997. Monstrous hell bride, swamp thing from hell. Heaney, 1999. It makes some sense that she'd be translated that way. Her son, Grendel, eats people and can carry home a doggy bag full of warriors. It's just the two of them living in their Undermere Hall, and for many late 19th and early 20th century translators of this text, it would only have followed for the monstrous portion of Grendel's parentage to be his mother rather than his absentee father. For most of those translators, the difficulty of imagining a human woman, fully armed, fully elderly, she's been ruler of her kingdom as long as Hrothgar's been ruler of his, would have been insurmountable. There are other explanations for monsterhood in Grendel's mother, of course, some interesting ones. I'm somewhat persuaded by the adjacent lore surrounding troll transformation due to rape. And there's a long footnote here. For more on this, see the wonderfully titled chapter, quote, Bone crones have no hearth, some women in the medieval wilderness, unquote, by Mary Jane Osborne and Gillian R. Overing in Textures of Place, Exploring Humanist Geographies, from 2001. See also Osborne's original poem, Grendel's Mother Broods Over Her Feral Son, Old English Newsletter 39 from 2006, based on a 1914 scrap of philological interpretation by William A. P. Sewell, the notion that Scyld-Scefing decimated the Earli, the tallest people of Scandinavia, who fought like wild beasts. In Osborne's poem, Grendel's mother is part of that massacred tribe, and Grendel's father, by rape, is Scyld's descendant, the Halfdane, making Grendel brother to Hrothgar, and Grendel's war on Heorot Hall an act of blood feud vengeance. Also, the poem is in Grendel's mother's voice, which is reason enough to read it. So, back to the text. I'm somewhat persuaded by adjacent lore surrounding troll transformation due to rape, if only because the poisonous myth that a raped woman is a ruined woman, thus an abomination, and thus all too possibly evil, has persisted as long as women have. And continues to this day, as a little aside. See Texas. Grendel's father is an unknown. That said, though, Grendel's mother doesn't behave like a monster. She behaves like a bereaved mother who happens to have a warrior's skill. The tradition of monstrous depiction, assisted by monstrous physical descriptors, persevered in translation, though not necessarily in scholarship, into the later years of the 20th century and beyond, particularly after Frederick Kleber's 1922 glossary defined the word used to reference Grendel's mother, Aglaecwyf, as wretch or monster of a woman. Never mind that Aglaecwyf wife is merely the feminine form of Aglaeca, which Kleber defines as hero when applied to Beowulf, and monster, demon, fiend when referencing Grendel, his mother, and the dragon. Aglaeca is used elsewhere in early English to refer to both Sigmund and to the venerable Bede, and in those contexts, it's likelier to mean something akin to formidable. Fair enough. Multiple meanings to Old English words, after all. Grendel's mother is referred to in the poem as Ides Aglaecwyf, which means, given this logic, formidable noblewoman. She isn't physically described beyond that she looks like a woman and is tall. The Old English word for fingers, fingrum, has frequently been translated as claws, but Grendel's mother fights effectively with a knife. Wielding a knife while also possessing long nails is, as anyone who's ever had a manicure knows, a near impossibility. The word Brimwilf, or sea-wolf, is also used as a supporting argument for monstrosity, but it's a guess. The manuscript itself reads Brimwil, which may have been meant to be Brimwif. Elsewhere, Grendel's mother is referred to as a Meerwife, or ocean woman, so it's very possible that scribal error introduced a wolf where wife should be, and that traditions of gendered hierarchy made a monster of a mother. In any case, sea-wolf is a poetic term, and might be as easily applied to Beowulf as it is to Grendel's mother. In Beowulf, it seems likely to me that some translators, seeking to make their own sense of this story, have gone out of their way to bolster Beowulf's human credentials by amplifying the monstrosity of Grendel's mother, when in truth the combatants are similar. They're both extraordinary fighters, and the battle between Beowulf and Grendel's mother is, unlike other battles in the poem, a battle of equally matched warriors. God's established soft spot for Beowulf is the deciding factor, not physical strength. Ecgtheow's heir would have been filleted, recategorized as MIA, and left to rot in her cavern, had not his suit saved him. That, too, was God's work. The Lord, maker of miracles, sky designer, had no trouble leveling the playing field, when Beowulf beat the Count and stood. He glimpsed it hanging in her hoard, that armory of heirlooms, somebody's birthright. A sword, blessed by blood and flood. The poet's description of Grendel's mother is complex, as admiring as it is critical. The proximity in the text of the heroic Hildebert, whose narrative of loss and vengeance is only a step and a knife removed from Grendel's mother's story, isn't accidental. In terms of narrative balance, I'm interested in versions of the Beowulf story that emphasize Grendel's mother's right to recompense for the death of her son. Early English feud rules allow blood for blood, and in killing one of Hrothgar's advisors, Grendel's mother exacts a legal revenge. Later in the story, Beowulf himself takes feud rule vengeance for the death of his young king Heardred, arming rebels to eliminate Heardred's killer, Onela. I don't know that Grendel's mother should be perceived in binary terms, monster versus human. My own experiences as a woman tell me it's very possible to be mistaken for monstrous when one is only doing as men do, providing for and defending oneself. Whether one's solitary status is a result of abandonment by a man or because of a choice, the reams of lore about single, self-sustaining women, and particularly about solitary elderly women, suggest that many human women have been, over the centuries, mistaken for supernatural creatures simply because they were alone and capable. For all these reasons, I've translated Grendel's mother here as warrior woman, outlaw, and reclusive night queen. Throughout the poem, I've also encouraged moments in which the feminine might already be poetically suggested. Thus, lines 1431 to 1439, wherein Hrothgar and Beowulf's men arrive at the mere and kill a sea monster, become Agayet drew his bow and struck a slithering one. An arrow piercing its scales, it struggled and thrashed in the water. The other men, invigorated, sought to join the killing. A second shot, a third. Then they slung themselves into the shallows and speared it. This monster they could control. They cornered it, clubbed it, tugged it onto the rocks, stillbirthed it from its mere mother, deemed it damned, and made of it a miscarriage. Similarly, in lines 1605 to 1610, as Beowulf discovers that the sword he's used to kill Grendel's mother is melting, I used the existing lines, which could suggest a literal defrosting of springs, to suggest a situation in which spring is a captive, chained and released by God. There is plenty in the world history of pagan seasonal myth to support such a reading, and similar references to captivity and power abound in the poem, including in the scene these lines are from. Below, in Beowulf's hands, the slaying sword began to melt like ice, just as the world thaws in May when the father unlocks the shackles that have chained frost to the climate, and releases hostage heat, uses sway over seasons to uncage his prisoner, Spring, and let her stumble into the sun. I see women in this story as part of a continuum of experience, just as the men are. Freowaru, the bartered beautiful bride, who takes the first steps into a blood wedding. Modthrith, the bartered bad bride, who seeks preemptive vengeance on the world of men before entering an unexpectedly happy marriage. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Modthrith is often the only character cut from children's versions of Beowulf. Hwæt, the self-bartering bride, who attempts, and fails, to negotiate her son's survival by persuading Beowulf to ascend to kingship over him. Hildebur, the failed peace weaver, who incubates over winter a yearning for vengeance, after her son, brother, and ultimately her husband are killed. Walchtheo, the canny queen, who is often depicted as acquiescent. In fact, her speech to the hall during the post-Grendel celebration is a masterpiece of negotiation. Within her role as an obedient wife, she works the room to her own advantage, attempting to gain security for her sons from the hero her husband has become smitten with. I translated Walchtheo's speech to clarify the threats I think have always been part of it. Grendel's mother, the unhusbanded warrior, who rules her own kingdom until she is elderly, losing her son but succeeding in exacting bloody vengeance. To that coven I've added the dragon, footnote, often depicted as male rather than as ungendered, curled about her hoard, her bedchamber invaded by someone seeking to burgle. Her vengeance for that theft lights the sky and land on fire. After vengeance comes grief. The last woman in the story is the Geatish woman, the mourner, not mourning Beowulf so much as her own future without a king, new versions of old horrors. Blood, swords, and men. That this occurs just prior to Beowulf's funerary tribute, his men repeating variations on "that was a good king," is no accident. Her agonized inclusion here renders that final round of tributes ironic. In the end, Beowulf depicts edge times and border wars, and we're in them still. As I write this introduction, and as I worked on this translation over the past few years, the world of the poem felt increasingly relevant. I regularly found myself muttering speeches written 1,000 years ago as I watched their contemporary equivalents unfold on the news. This moment, and the moments before it, the centuries of colonialist impulse and kingdom building, the peoples being built upon, are things that concerned the Beowulf poet and concern this translator too. The news cycle is filled with men Hrothgar's age failing utterly at self-awareness, and even going full Heremod. Politics twist paradoxically into ever more isolationist and interventionist corners, increasingly based in hoarding and horde panic. That's HOARDING and HORDE panic. Dash panic, which is some cute wordplay. The world, as ever, is filled with desolate places and glittering ones, sharing armed borders. Children are confiscated. Refugees are imprisoned. The people doing the imprisoning claim they're persecuting criminals, monsters, but some of those are infants, and most of those are running from worse wars in their own homelands. We are, some of us anyway, living the Geatish woman's lament, writ large. In the United States of 2020, everyone, including small children, has the capacity to be as deadly as the spectacular warriors of this poem. The teeth, swords, and claws of the Old English epic have been converted into automatic possibilities, the power to slay 30 men in a minute no longer the genius of a select few, but a purchasable perk of weapon ownership. The kings and dragons of the poem possess hoards akin to those of basic American households: iPhone idols, non-stick cookware, unused goblets counted by the dozen. Queen and king-sized beds for the queens and kings of small halls in the suburbs. Fake feathers and swan's down like the reclaimed wings of minor monsters, bought and shipped overnight by Amazon Prime, itself a corporation named for a legendary tribe of female warriors, though in this case the title of warrior stands in for consumer convenience. Sorcerous shipping speeds, access to the great luxuriant on sale everything. And yet, possessions bring no peace. So many wars, so many kingdoms, so much calamity. As I write this, the non-corporate Amazon is burning, and Australia is burning too. In the north, closer to the places of this poem, icebergs calve into already brimming seas, and formerly frozen lands reveal the bones and treasures of the dead, melting into mud. COVID-19, a coronavirus, sweeps across the world's population, shifting our understanding of normalcy daily, if not hourly. Rulers stand shaking their fists and shouting, and though the shouting is done these days on Twitter, the content is the same as it ever was. We will come for you. You don't know who God is. You can't have the riches of the world. Everything is ours. Though Beowulf is written from the corner of the people in power, we can see the impoverished and imperiled in exposition. The farmers looking up, fearing the blast, as a dragon scars their fields. The commoners who live abutting the mere, who watch Grendel and his mother and report to their king. The slave who steals a goblet from a dragon, hoping to use it to pay off some unwritten debt to his master. Those who report in this poem often report because they're hoping desperately to change their status, to come in from the cold to a position nearer the fire. And on the other side of it, kings froth at the mouth and care nothing for their citizens. A hero dies by dragon and leaves his kingdom to invaders. The home that a soldier or a bride dreams of returning to when the war is finally over may be a scorch mark on the earth when they finally make it back. Storytellers spit a lot of truth in Beowulf. They bear dire reports, recaps, and comparisons, or, as the Geatish woman does, lament horrors to come. They're also the ones doing the burying, the last survivors. I can only imagine the living role of the Beowulf poet, but the poem itself gives us some intriguing examples of Shopes declaiming material at odds with celebrations. In an oral tradition, even a king's poet would have needed to flex to get the floor. Beowulf itself is a flex by the poet, dazzle camouflaging early English actuality in an imagined elsewhere of monsters and boar helms. If nothing else, the history of stories is a history of fantastical versions of what we might be and become. When I think about Beowulf these days, some 35 years after I saw Grendel's mother standing alone with her knife and her rage, I often find myself thinking about Beowulf's barrow. Some think it's just meant to be a monument. Others think the barrow is intended to be a beacon, meant to warn ships of jutting land. My interpretation varies depending on the day, but I tend to think that the stories themselves are the lighthouses. Sometimes I picture a map of the world, the kind of map I used to pore over as a child, obsessing over the now familiar warning, Hic sunt dracones. On that imaginary map, I've added story lighthouses. They're all over the place. Look here, their light tells us. Here's a safe spot to tie up your boat and disembark. Here's a spot to watch out for. Out here are dragons. Out here are the stories of those dragons, and of those heroes, and more. There are also stories that haven't yet been reckoned with, stories hidden within the stories we think we know. It takes new readers, writers, and scholars to find them, people whose experiences, identities, and intellects span the full spectrum of humanity, not just a slice of it. That is, in my opinion, the reason to keep analyzing texts like Beowulf. We might, if we analyzed our own long-standing stories, use them to translate ourselves into a society in which hero making doesn't require monster killing, border closing, and horde clinging, but instead requires a more challenging task, taking responsibility for one another. MDH, New York City, March 3rd, 2020. MDH being Maria Dahvana Headley. And that was the introduction to Beowulf, a New Translation, which I saved for the end because we do everything backward here. That will do it for this week, for today, this week. Next Wednesday, I will start Termouche, a novel by Sven Holm, and it's about the end of the world. So very, very lighthearted and fun. Extremely. Later this week, we have continued reading from Destination Void by Frank Herbert. We are banging along on that one. I think we're about halfway now. Yeah, we're about halfway through. Yeah, and next Monday we'll be banging through more of Armor by John Stakely. So yeah, that'll about do it. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you are tuning in for the first time and wondering why everything here is so rough, it's because I read these live, and they remain unedited. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 12 noon Eastern Standard, Frickadoodle, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, or U.S. East Coast Time, or UTC -5. Whichever one of those is easier for you to figure out and find out when, if you so choose, to tune in live, which you don't have to because they're all up on the YouTube channel that should be linked in the stream description if you're tuning in via, say, Twitch, for instance, which I also tend to simulcast too. Anyway, otherwise, feel free to tune in to them at your leisure. By no means am I saying you need to tune in, you need to like and subscribe and follow. Don't. If the algorithm's gonna do what it's gonna do, it's gonna do what it's gonna do. I'm not gonna tell people to tweak it in my favor. You can if you want. I'm never gonna get paid for these, so I've made my peace with that notion. I never really had it in the first place. I just kind of wanted to read cool books aloud for fun. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Kiri. Glad you could catch me live. Can't listen in right now, still at work, but just wanted to give me a view and tell how much I appreciate my amazing reads. Really looking forward to listening to more of Destination Void. Thank you. I hope you do enjoy, because I think Destination Void is wild. It's crazy reading that after reading having read it ages ago and then rereading it after a whole lot of other books I've been exposed to and being like, wow, he was so far ahead of the curve, man. Frank Herbert, if nothing else, he was well ahead of the curve. He was on a curve of his own. Anyway, um, yeah, that'll do it. So other than that, stay safe, stay safe. Oh, and I update the playlists every month. Usually at the beginning of each month, I get those updated, or end of each month, I get those updated so that they are set and things are reasonably organized in my own horrific organizational schema, which doesn't really work. It works for me. I don't know if it works for anyone else, but it works for me. So I can find it when I have to download them later on my own time. So that I have a backup and I don't have to redo them. And in case I have to re-upload them, which may or may not happen at some point with, say, Echopraxia, which I've had to take down because the first one I had to do a re-upload of because it got mangled. The recording was fine, but the other was not. And I uploaded that, and then a Books on Tape company dinged me. And I was like, oh, they didn't ding any of the rest of the ones. They just dinged the first installment of that, which is the only one that was a uploaded file. And I was like, oh, noted. I can send links to people for those at some later date once I get some sort of a social networking schema up. I don't actually use social media. This is it. This is me. This is what you get. I'm I may like whip together like a Discord channel because I can easily moderate that and check in on it with some frequency, which I'm probably not going to do for any other thing other than if you leave comments, I see those. I do check for those. So feel free to do that if you want. Also, massive, massive thank you to all the people who are putting in timestamps for when the reading starts. Thank you so much. I know who you are. I noticed you. You're real. Thank you. I mean, if you're an algorithm doing it, that's wild. That's wild, wild. So yes, thank you to underscore dot underscore dot and BMXT939. You've done a bunch of those lately. Thank you to everyone else. Wow, people left a lot of comments very recently. Good golly. Yikes. Okay, I'm gonna have to get caught up on those. I wasn't online at all yesterday, so I'm all catching up. Anyway, that'll do it for me. So see you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, be toasty or cool as your preference or geolocation permit, and be decent to each other. I think that's kind of part of the message of Maria Dahvana Headley's translation of Beowulf, and indeed I'd argue the original is, hey, be decent to each other. For a start, it's a good idea. Anyway, sees you all later. Until next time, bye. Toodles.